I love this area of the paper. Snipers and ghosts. The, pa- the paper says standardization can be the enemy of agility. Again, standardization can be the enemy of agility, so it deploys specialized nodes.
hmm
Tell us a little bit about snipers and ghosts, please.
The ghost is going to say, I got a guy. And he's going to go to Joey saying, you got to do me this. You got to do me this solid. I've got 25 containers.
Yeah.
I got 25 containers. I got to move from point A to point B.
Oh,
How do I get
all right.
that
That
smooth it?
right there is.
You're listening to Supply Chain Unlocked. Get exclusive insights from industry leaders on overcoming challenges.
Hello, I have Tom Brouillette with me today. He wrote a white paper that we are discussing titled The Great Decoupling, Architecting the Anti-Fragile Supply Mesh. I've read through this, and I definitely encourage Tom to bring it on the show. It has some good insights in it. Today's episode is a scenario planning discussion about the heightened Middle East conflict risk and what it exposes in global supply chains. It's choke point exposure, lead time volatility, and the financial fog that shows up the moment routing changes. Guys, this is supply chain, scenario planning discussions, not a political debate. But we're always welcome for comments in the comment field below, because if you feel this is political, go ahead and let us know. We'll go from there. So let's get into it. You know, what we're doing and what we're not doing. So let me give Tom some questions here, then he can pick from what he wants to answer. But we're not predicting politics. We're stress testing supply chains. So, Tom, what does choke point exposure mean operationally, and where does volatility hit first? Insurance, schedules, inventory, or cash?
Okay, let's start with the choke point. I guess that's the most important thing from the person's perspective. The choke point is actually exactly where you first run into the issue. So the choke point is your weakest link, if you will, from this perspective. And that's the critical point. And that's your analysis and planning perspective. So you want to take a look at this. What we're really talking about here is risk management and risk mitigation. So the choke point is your risk, if you will. And how do you reduce the risk or eliminate the risk? So that's the point here.
Or some of the choke points, not to cut you off, but is a choke point, well, in today's terms, as a big macro example, the Suez Canal,
Mm-hmm.
the deal with going on with Iran.
Mm-hmm.
Did we expect this? No. How do we deal
Strait of
with it?
Hormuz. Sorry.
Strait of Hormuz. Wow, what's wrong with me?
Yeah.
Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, the Suez Canal is next door.
Yeah. Sorry, I was reading another article this morning on that one. But anyways, so that's one example. And then the other one is, where does that volatility hit first?
Right. So the Strait of Hormuz is the choke point. And then within that you have the individual, where does it hit first? And my perspective on the challenge here is that we have a tendency to get hung up on what I think of as the headlines. So in this case, the headlines is the impact to the oil supply, right? The choke point is the oil getting through the Strait of Hormuz. Another interesting term that they had that they're using, I've heard people using in this instance, is going through the Strait of Hormuz, where it's at its narrowest point. That's the kill box, if you will. You know that it's going to go through there, and they know in Iran that it's going to go through there. So it becomes a bit of a shooting gallery going through that narrowest place. So that's the biggest issue that people are worried about. But you've got a lot of ancillary issues that we've been experiencing as well, right? With the munitions and the bombings that are going on that impact other areas of supply, such as the LNG that's going through Qatar, helium that goes through Qatar, and all of those are impacting things. I saw an interesting clip on the news, the impact of the gas the natural gas is really severely impacting in the Asia marketplace to the point of they're having trouble with production of energy for electricity, and then the natural gas with the especially as it relates to propane and things that people use for heating their home and cooking is impacted. So people are scrambling trying to find other materials to burn so that they can cook. So it's all of these little ancillary things that are beyond the headline, that in this case the oil, which are probably more important.
Yeah, so let's transition. Well, let's continue around the Strait of Hormuz. When choke points become high risk, what's the first order of effects? And then the second order of effects, and frankly, that leaders are missing.
Well, the first order effects are the high risk trying to get your materials through that narrow strait. And there's a couple of options there. One option is a rail line that they're using for some materials that go from the Qatar. It goes from Qatar to the Red Sea, and then you've got a pipeline going through Saudi Arabia for the gas, for the oil that brings it over to the Red Sea. The problem that you have to be aware of and plan for with the Red Sea is there happens to be another ally of Iran at that narrowest place going into the Red Sea that can actually close down the Red Sea and the Suez Canal then. So you've got that interesting little tidbit going on. The second order effects get into the other areas that are impacted. The LNG, helium, and the other thing is the fertilizer. They supply 20% of 30% of the world's fertilizer through that uh, route. So you've got that impact going on, which right now it happens to come at probably at one of the worst times of the year when farmers, especially in the U.S., are looking to plant their crops. So anybody in the northern hemisphere is really looking to plant their crops, and if you've suddenly got 20% or 30% of your fertilizer supply yanked away, that turns into a second order that expands out to now there's there's a potential for shortages.
Yeah. So I think where you're going with that, or I shouldn't say where you're going with it. It really sounds like a variance problem. When you get a choke point like this, it ends up with lead time swings, pricing spikes, contractual ambiguity starts coming out when you got these problems.
Hmm.
Let's go and transition, and really we're digging more into your paper, your white paper. We pull in the paper's core argument, the monolith versus the anti-fragile mesh. And I'm just, again, referring to that. And that monolith is a lot about fixed costs, slow visibility, bureaucratic leg. And then we have the other piece of that, and I'll let you pick up there, that you get into with things like earn as burn.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, the monolith. Think of the monolith as one of the large shippers, like a Maersk, who does quite a bit of ocean vessel shipments and rail and things like that. They actually got into the here in the U.S. the domestic truck carriers as well. And the problem there is that these monoliths, for lack of a better term, they are stuck in the process and the procedure. And as a result, well, not as a result, a significant portion of their income is related to the process and the procedure. And what you find is that they are quick to put a cost at a cost to their shipments to recoup the increases in shipping costs. So the increase in oil would be addressed through a surcharge that they charge. They're quick to apply the surcharge, but once they apply the surcharge, they're rather slow to reduce that surcharge. The common argument is that they look at the surcharge on a monthly basis, which
Yeah.
So what you're going to have to, worst case scenario, it's going to be at least 30 days later that you're going to be paying that inflated surcharge. So you've got that cost going on. Then you've got the cost of rerouting shipments. And this is where it starts to get especially painful for the smaller shippers, the mid-sized companies that are not the key shippers, the volume shippers who get the big discount and they get placed first in line. So if a disruption occurs here and a port gets shut down, which essentially is what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz, the Monolith Maersk is going to focus on their biggest customers first and prioritize their loads, their container shipments. The smaller companies are going to be pushed off. They're not going to be prioritized. So it's kind of like, when you're flying, you have your status level. And if your flight is canceled and you're a platinum, gold, a diamond platinum level, you're going to get first priority over the person that's not even a gold level, right? So
Like an executive platinum.
yeah, it's the same idea with the shipping containers. The executive platinum is going to get all their containers shipped, whereas the gold level, they're going to have to sit and wait. And what happens there is they're going to have to pay penalty fees, increased fees for those containers to be shipped. So they're going to get a minimum of probably $1,500 to $2,000 per container added to their cost.
Yeah, and then there's the other piece, right? The alternative, which is the smaller, not the
Yes.
monolith, right?
Right. And the advantage of the smaller decentralized mesh is that they can move faster and take advantage of identifying the risk that occurred, identifying the disruption quickly so that they can take action prior to these monoliths actually realizing that there's a problem and shifting, right?
Yeah. So let's go and transition. So how do we change our architecture of what we're talking about from such a, I would say, like sloth-like maneuvering of the monolith without ripping out the ERP? That's where the Sentinel protocol comes in, right? From your paper?
Exactly. The Sentinel protocol. It's what another way to think of it is that it's a non-invasive intelligence. So it's an integration platform that sits between both different suppliers, different partners, and different systems that can take that information in and understand the information, analyze the information on its path through to its landing point. So in other words, the information from your carriers and your suppliers would go through this integration platform on its way to your ERP or your WMS. So
Can I call that like Google Maps rerouting?
Yes, exactly. And what will happen is that you can add your own intelligence to provide an alert immediately when there's an issue. So if there's a bump in the night, you would get an alert that says, "Oh, there's a impact. There's a delay that's occurring. There's a disruption," and it would give you, rather than waiting 24 hours for an update, you would know at the moment when it occurs so that you can take action and reroute your containers to go to another carrier, another port, in order to take advantage, in order to delay and get first in line for reserving the space on vessels.
So let me ask this. I got a note to ask you about this. The shadow audit, which is day 1 through 30, to identify the index lag. Let's cover that a little bit in your thoughts, your deeper thoughts, and maybe that's not just in writing. Shadow audit.
Yeah, that's kind of related to the actual index cost collaboration, or calibration, not collaboration, calibration. So this is a method of identifying time, the surcharges, matching the surcharges to the exact market spot rate at the moment of departure, right? So what you're doing is you're looking at, think of it this way: you're going out on a family vacation. You're kind of paying attention to the price of gas leading up to that, right? But The real-time forensic calculation, if you will, is as you're driving down the highway and you start to run low on gas and you're looking for gas prices, right? Or a gas station, really. And you kind of like, I know here, if I am driving down to Atlanta, I know that I want to purchase gas in South Carolina rather than in North Carolina or Atlanta, because that's the cheapest gas that I can get in that route. So think of that as your spot rate calculation at the moment of departure. So if we go back to the example of the Red Sea, when there was the drought that occurred, or actually it was actually the Suez Canal issue. The most recent one was the war between Palestine and Israel, when there was the Suez Canal everything was rerouted out of the Red Sea. The spot rates for the containers during that issue really flashed up, and then they became very erratic. They fluctuated wildly as they were going through the process. So the Monolith, remember I was talking about the Monolith, they're quick to increase their surcharge and slow to decrease the surcharge. The Monolith is going to immediately charge the highest surcharge in the entire market in order to cover their span. So and then their goal, honestly, is to route as many shipments, as many containers as they can through the lowest surcharge rates as they can, so that the difference between the lowest surcharge rate and the highest surcharge rate, they keep as profit, right?
I got you.
So that shadow audit is the process of identifying those types of actual costs versus charged costs.
Yeah. So let's transition to the disruption. Disruptions like this reveals attacks, right? The case study describes a passive ransom model, force majeure, reroutes, surcharges, and SLA commitments that are voided.
Mhm.
What does that happen? Or why does that happen?
Well, because they can. So,
That was too simple. Yeah, that's a good point.
okay, let's move on.
Yeah, we got a timeline to hit here, people. No,
Yeah.
seriously, at the end of the day, it is, right?
It is. It's, so getting back to that, what I mentioned earlier, that there's a $1,500 to $2,500 container, per container, added as surcharges for reroutes in 10 to 14 days. So, these reroutes are all occurring in 10 to 14 days. If you have 500, and you saw this with the pandemic as well. Somebody is shipping products, and the container may have, prior to the disruption, the container may have cost $3,000 to ship. After the disruption, it's going to cost you $6,000 to ship, or $5,000 to ship. It doubles the cost of it, essentially, as a penalty. Then you take into account how much the product costs and how much you can sell it as. And then you get into this calculation. Does it even make sense? I'm taking a huge loss by bringing this product over.
Sorry, go ahead.
Good.
Let's transition us to the opportunity zones
Mhm.
created by the volatility. And here's why I'm bringing up this subject is, with any type of disruption, people get fired up about it becoming inconvenience or rising cost, right? And it becomes politicized, especially in this case. But for me, inherently, I find that opportunity in chaos. So where are the opportunity zones that you see with this disruption?
The infrastructure that you use, the systems and solutions that you're using during a disruption, you will identify a lot of areas for improvements. And then you need to determine how long is it going to take you to make those improvements. So that's one thing that really makes a big difference. And then the other route is to diversify the flows. And this is a big point. This is an important point, in my opinion, because disruptions will occur for many different reasons. We're using the disruption in the Suez Canal and in the Strait of Hormuz as an example of a type of disruption. But that's just one example. The important point for this, to be able to to reduce your overall risk is to start to identify how you can diversify your flows. And that can mean all different alternative routes. I don't want to go from one, I can move part of my orders from one port to another port, from one supplier to another supplier. And the point there is to start to develop your supply network of partners and service providers that can be expanded and contracted as different disruptions occur. So take this as an example. I have a pain point, a choke point in the Strait of Hormuz with the appropriate routes, the appropriate rail, pipeline, truck corridors. You can actually move your product from one location, from one port to another. You can actually partner or contract with different suppliers that are located in different geographic areas. That's a big deal. And that kind of expands into the entire marketplace, because the point of the matter is that you want to be able to identify, sense the disruption, identify when it occurs, and take immediate action. But you have to prepare your network for immediate action. You can't just say, well, this supplier might be able to provide me with my blue shirt that the other supplier is providing. And then when I can't get the blue shirt from the first provider, it'll take me 3 months to ramp up with a new supplier. So you've got to have these warm spares available, and you've got to nurture the relationship. You can't just say at some point in time, I might come to you with 10,000, requesting 10,000 pallets of product. You have to actually split and level set your orders between the 2 or 3 suppliers in order to maintain their interest and maintain the currency of it.
So let's move towards. I love this area of the paper. Snipers and ghosts. The paper says standardization can be the enemy of agility. Again, standardization can be the enemy of agility, so it deploys specialized nodes. Tell us a little bit about snipers and ghosts, please.
It's a very visual context, isn't it? So the
Yeah.
sniper is the regional carrier that has shown an ability to bypass gridlocks. They have an understanding of the vicinity and where they're going. They have an understanding and arrangement with the ports, that they understand how to get their product to them quickly. And so they are the ones they're the guys that make it happen, right? They're the guys that are going to take your containers from one port that you can't ship from to another port that you can ship from.
So it's an actual carrier. Right?
Yeah.
The physical carrier guy that's actually going to, in this context, shoot the bullet. So it's probably a Joey's trucking company
It
that's
could be,
going to get it from A to B to the new port, right?
Yep.
And then the ghost, what's a ghost?
Well, the ghost is the guy that has the customs relationships and information. And so the ghost is the guy he's going to clear the flags and the issues with imports and exports so that your product will flow. And this is very much a relationship. This is the person that has the relationships with the customs agents at the port. This is the person that knows, if I'm missing this document, I can do this other thing in order to get the shipment through. I can produce.
So it's the dude that's on the ground that has tribal knowledge.
Yep.
That says, I know a guy, and his name is Joey.
Yeah.
And then I got Tom over here in customs. We'll get that paperwork done for you.
Yeah, he's going to say the ghost is going to be notified by Tom that, hey, I got a problem. And the ghost is going to say, I got a guy. And he's going to go to Joey saying, you got to do me this solid. I've got 25 containers I got to move from point A to point B. I get
right, that right there is going to be the highlight reel, Tom.
Yeah.
All right. Now, what can we make actual? We got to start landing the plane here now that I'm looking at our clock. 90 days. What can we do in the next 1 to 30 and then 60 to 90?
Yeah, this is the key point of the earn as you burn model. The earn part is capturing ROI. The burn part is the work that I got to do in order to capture the ROI. Okay. So in the first 30 days, you're going to evaluate the current environment, and you're going to do your audits, your shadow audits. And we've got, we come to the table with a number of places to look for money. We've shaken the money tree before. We know where it falls from. So we're going to go shake the money tree for you. And we're going to come back with these reports that are going to identify your high value return, your high value quick return. Then the second 30 days, we're going to develop a tool. We're going to develop the capability to be able to do a comparison of the legacy process to the proposed process. That is important because it speeds the delivery of the improvements by validating by validating quickly. You're doing a comparison of what the results are. And
Understood. Go ahead. My bad.
and then the final 90 days is when you do the full decoupling, if you will. That's when you're going to start doing all of this for yourself, and you're going to break away from the monolith. So, these organizations have relationships with the monolith, and they're being taken advantage of from a very
Gotcha.
specific perspective. We're going to give them the tools and the measures to be able to go back to that monolith and say, listen, we're breaking our contract. We're leaving because of this, and this.
Gotcha. All right, let's go and land this plane. What are some overarching thoughts that are either in defense of your paper or just actions that people should be taking?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In other words, the Monday morning actions, right? Where do we go
Yeah.
from here? So if you're operator monitoring the volatility, you need to put the analytics in place and capture the data. You need to do and it all comes back to the simple things, right? You need to do your audit. Where am I weak? Where am I strong? Where's the biggest choke point? Those are the things that you need to start putting together. I need to identify my monitoring points that are going to identify how I know that I'm doing the right thing. And then you're going to identify your choice points to be able to target your activities.
Gotcha. Well put. Well, Tom, we really appreciate your time. It is definitely insightful to the audience. We'll have the link to his white paper, Tom's white paper. But again, Tom, thank you for your time.
Absolutely.
And in closing, this is Supply Chain Unlocked. No hype, no vanity, just execution, like Tom's been talking about. If you disagree with our assumption, put it in the comments. We want the opposing view as long as it's operator grade. Don't need a lot of C-level vanity in the comments, but you can throw those in there too. We'll respond, or I'll personally respond, because everybody knows how I love C-level vanity talk. Alrighty, guys. Thank you very much for your time. Have a good day.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody. See you later, Teddy.
You're listening to Supply Chain Unlocked. Get exclusive insights from industry leaders on overcoming challenges.